Ambrose Bierce writes one of the earliest depictions of a robot without actually calling it a robot. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the strange and unusual literature that I've found in my travels. And today's a bit of a strange one or weird one for us. It's a short story Tuesday, so I wanted to focus on a short story of interest. And today's short story is all about robots. I am referring to Moxon's Master by Ambrose Bierce, which was written in 1899 and first published in the San Francisco Examiner. I've talked about Ambrose Bierce before, so I don't need to go into that great of detail. Check out my video on an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge for more details. But for those who don't know, Ambrose Bierce was an American writer who lived between the mid 1800s and the early 1900s. He was known for being a journalist, but also wrote a number of short stories. He's mostly known for An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is pretty good. I've also talked about A Horseman in the Sky, which was supernatural and pretty cool. And then here I am talking about Moxon's Master, which, as I mentioned in the cold open, is one of the first depictions of robots in literature. And I'm just surprised no one ever talks about this. An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge is pretty good, but if someone was known for writing like an early depiction of robots, I'd also want to be talking about that. But I guess it's just what literature people choose to talk about. And the last thing that's worth noting is he disappeared while doing journalism stuff during the Mexican Civil War of the early 1900s. So nobody knows when he died, which is a bit of an interesting tidbit there. But without further ado, let's talk about Moxon's Master. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Moxon's Master focuses on an unnamed narrator who is speaking to presumably a friend, a local inventor named Moxon, who works with various types of machines. And at the beginning of the story, the narrator has been told by Moxon that machines can think, and he's a bit of a skeptic about it. Not sure if he believes that machines can actually think because they're nothing like human beings. But they then have like a philosophical conversation which goes to plants and how plants know where water is, so they could be thinking creatures. And they talk about Herbert Spencer and his definition of life, which seems to account for machines, and also talking about cause and effect and how we don't really know too much about those types of things, at least at the time. It sort of gives way for how machines can be thinking and conscious creatures. While all of this is happening, the narrator hears noises coming from a machine room that Moxon won't let the narrator enter. The only person who can go in there is Haley, his apprentice, and Haley's not really talking too much about what he's seeing in there. And when Moxon goes in there, he hears a kerfuffle, the narrator does, and Moxon comes out with like a scratch on his face, which the narrator finds humorous because he doesn't really believe that like a robot is doing that to him. And so finally the narrator is just like, I don't understand you. I'm confused by all of this, and I don't think you're really being honest with me here, so I'm going to leave. And he leaves annoyed, and he's walking home in the rain, and he realizes he's very much interested in this machine creature that Moxon keeps talking about. So he finally returns, kind of sneaks into Moxon's house, and then walks into the machine room. And when he gets in there, he sees that Moxon is playing chess with what seems to be another big burly gorilla-like person. None of them are paying attention to the narrator as they walk into the room. And the narrator slowly realizes that the big burly person is a machine that is like thinking and doing human movements, even though it is not actually a human person. Unfortunately, Moxon makes a winning move in this chess match and this upsets the machine, and the machine immediately jumps and tries to kill Moxon. The narrator tries to intervene, but a lightning bolt strikes the house and sets it ablaze. And at this point, the narrator collapses and passes out, and they wake up a few days later, where they find that they were rescued by Haley, the apprentice, and that Moxon was killed in the incident. And so the narrator asks Haley, like, what became of the robot that killed Moxon? To which Haley's just terrified of that, and he's like, "Oh, you knew about that robot?" It seemingly confirms that the narrator is right in what they saw. And as the story comes to a close, they note that they were pretty sure that that's what they saw at the time, but years later, as they're recalling these events, they have their doubts, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit worth talking about with Moxon's master. Again, it should be noted that this is one of the first depictions of robots in literature. Obviously, Ambrose Bierce wasn't the first person to really do that, and there were other authors who were talking about even more fantastic things about technology at the time. But it's still important and still really cool that Ambrose Bierce was one of the first to do that, and to do it in such a philosophical and narratively interesting kind of way. I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. But one of the main themes that Bierce is talking about here is that of thinking and consciousness. The narrator and Moxon debate what makes something conscious, what makes something a thinking creature on the level of maybe human beings. And this leads them to talk about the differences between man and a machine, because the narrator believes that like man is only thinking, and that machines, they're pre-programmed to do all these sorts of things, so they can't be really thinking. And that prompts the Moxon to be like, well, man and machine aren't really that different. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. What is a machine? The word has been variously defined. Here is one definition from a popular dictionary. Any instrument or organization by which power is applied and made effective, or a desired effect produced. Well then, is not a man a machine? And you will admit that he thinks, or thinks he thinks. And that's an interesting quote, because it really highlights the like how man and machine aren't really that different. Like you say, like machine are pre-programmed, but you could say like humans are pre-programmed either by a god or just by their own brains, their own structural wiring, their own genetic predispositions or something like that. So like there might not be that great of a difference, and in doing so, you can argue sentience, or at least consciousness, to machines. And not only that, but Moxon goes on to talk about how like plants can think because they can find water, and they grow in certain ways to find the light. And even philosophers are a little broad in their definitions of life, specifically highlighting Herbert Spencer. I'm sure other philosophers are much more narrow in their definition of what life is and what sentience is and what consciousness is. But here Moxon is just saying, Herbert Spencer said this, and you could reasonably fit machines into that definition and say that they are alive, that they have consciousness. And there is a pretty clear example of like a machine thinking about life here, or not thinking about life, but thinking. Like it thinks about chess moves, making actual thought process of what the best move might be, even if Moxon is just making quick moves and whatnot. And it thinks about killing Moxon, because as soon as it loses, it jumps across the table and tries to kill Moxon. So like, I lost, Moxon must die. As a result, I am very unhappy about losing. And you could argue that, again, maybe it was all pre-programmed to do that, but then you have to ask, like, aren't humans pre-programmed in the same way that if we lose, we might try to kill our opponents or something like that? I think all of this is really interesting, because the implications of Bierce's writing suggest that as technology develops, especially at a time in like the 1800s, like as that technology becomes more advanced, we have to broaden our definitions. We have to adapt and account for what we're seeing, what's actually happening in the world. And Bierce is really fascinating for arguing these sorts of things, because computers weren't really what they were now as opposed to late 1800s. But we could argue that computers are probably thinking that AI might become more advanced, and it might also be thinking, and even more types of technology might be capable of doing that, including our most advanced supercomputers. So very fascinating how Bierce was arguing this even in 1899. Another interesting aspect of the story is that of the title. It is Moxon's master. And you might be wondering, well, why is it titled that? Because clearly if Moxon created the robot, Moxon would be the master. But the robot kills him, as we see in this story. So the robot becomes the master of Moxon, showing that it is probably more in control of the situation. Not to say that murdering someone means that you're in control of them or something like that, but it clearly shows that the creature is more capable of thinking about what's going on than Moxon was really, because he couldn't foresee these consequences to his actions. And in a lot of ways, this is pretty similar to Frankenstein, because the monster in that story outlives Dr. Frankenstein, and Dr. Frankenstein comes to realize what a mistake it was to produce such a creature in the first place. And who knows what this robot is going to do now that it potentially escaped at the end of the story, because no one ever caught the robot after the house burned down. So what's going to happen there? Is the robot going to try to find a mate? That remains to be seen. But it is clear how Bierce was using a bit of wordplay with the title there. The last thing worth noting is the unreliable narrator in the story. The narrator is the only witness to Moxon's death, and furthermore, the house burned down, so you can't really find that much evidence of what took place, especially in the time that this was written. So there are a lot of questions that you got to ask. Did the narrator kill Moxon and then lie about it? Maybe when he's in the hospital bed, he says to Haley, what became of the robot that killed Moxon? As if to say, that it was the robot's fault. It wasn't mine. I might have been disgusted with Moxon, but our story is I didn't kill him. So maybe that's what happened. Where is the robot to begin with? Did it just escape? Given that there's no evidence of that, it's a little hard to believe the narrator there. And it's also possible that the narrator didn't really know what they saw, that they were influenced by Moxon's discussion of the robots and thinking machines, and as a result, he saw a big burly man and was like, this is obviously a robot. And then when the big burly man got upset and killed Moxon, he just attributed that to the robot. And so Moxon was probably killed by an actual human being. But the narrator believes otherwise. Maybe that's not actually what happened, but it leaves room for doubt because, again, the narrator passed out at a critical moment in the story, and they even say that they're unsure years later. We don't really have much to rely on but their word and, their memory, as well as the what happened to them in the story makes it difficult to really trust it. I believe that there's an actual robot there, but there's a lot of room to argue that the unreliable narrator makes it so something maybe more sinister happened here, but that remains to be seen. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Moxon's Master by Ambrose Bierce, a high-quality short story, one of the best that I've read recently. I definitely recommend that you go seek it out. It's a really good short story, but it's also a very probably influential short story. Or at least of one with pretty interesting foresight to see what was coming later down the road. If you have any thoughts on what I've said here, or you just want to comment on the story, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this story or this author if they don't already know. I'll also put a link to it in the description so you can read it, and also I'll put a link to the Discord so that you can join and have more conversations about those such things there. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and robotic travels. Farewell.